Alright guys, so in this video what I'm going to do is we've got our basic light setup done with our camera. What we want to do now is get the render settings all nice and set up, dial it in so that we can make our final production. So what I'm looking at is, first thing I'm going to do is, if we haven't done it already, go ahead and load up Mental Ray. So settings, preferences, make sure plugin manager, you have this thing called Maya Altimeter, which will be, one moment, right here, Mental Ray. This is going to be Mental Ray for Maya 2014. This thing here is Maya to Mental Ray, load, auto load if you haven't, and that'll set us up with Mental Ray renderer, which you'll see right here. So what I want to do is, using Mental Ray, render this thing out. So the first thing I want to do is go to my common settings and kind of fill in the blank here. Alright, so right now the fill in the blank is, we need a name for it. So this one's going to be wall sconce. Let's just call it turntable. Okay. Now image format, depending upon what you're wanting to do with it, I'd recommend either PNG, TIFF, or one of the standard kind of formats, in order to render this out as still images. If you're going to be using Photolapse 3 or some other program that that's going to need a certain format in order to compile to a video, then use your JPEG if you need it, in order to use Photolapse 3 to kind of stitch these things together. My big thing is I do not like to save these things out of the renderer as a video. I mean, you can, if you have that option to either do a move or an AVI or something along those lines, but I find that that Maya's renderer's unstable and unpredictability as far as rendering out the whole animation at one time is such that I hate to try to render it out as a final video straight out of Maya. Because if it crashes, well, then you have to start at the very beginning. Whereas if it crashes when you're doing single frame renders, you just have to find the last rendered good frame and restart your animation from there. Alright, so what I'm going to do is change the name extension. I prefer name _ number .extension. I just find it sorts the names better. This will make it wall sconce turntable _ 0. Whatever. Okay. Frame padding, you always want to make sure your frame padding is set up to be for the number of frames. So for example, my start frame here is going to be 0. My end frame is going to be 119 for 119 with a frame skip of 1, meaning I want to do every single frame, and that's going to be 0 through 119. That'll be 120 frames. It'll give me a full 4 seconds of animation. And that's what we're looking for here. So JPEG is what I'm going to end up going for here for the Photolapse 3. As you can see, I think there may be, I'm not seeing AVI or whatever on here, but some of them you'll see it pop up. But I'm going to use JPEG because of the Photolapse 3, but I would suggest, if you can, to use After Effects or whatever, use a PNG, a TIFF, something that's nice and uncompressed. Alright, next setting I want to go down to is scroll down to renderable camera. We want to make sure that's going to be our camera 1. And the preset, because this is going to be a widescreen HD, HD 540 is just fine for testing this stuff out, but what you're going to want to do is probably 720 or 1080p at the end. But what I want to do is use 540 for the moment as our preview resolution so that we can make sure everything looks good with a smaller resolution, and then we can render it out to full size. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is we have passes, we have features, quality, indirect lighting, other options. The main ones I want to look at here with features, I want to do global illumination, final gathering, and turn ambient occlusion on. Okay, you can do motion blur if you want to or not. I think for a simple turntable, leaving it off is probably a little better. And then what I want to do is go and fire up this thing, let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to click on my viewport over here with my camera 1, and I'm just going to hit the render button. Alright, so here's my sconce final render, looking a lot different than my viewport. So now let's see if we can tweak some things to figure out how to darken it. Alright, the issue I was having was I set up shader and the centricity value that was a little bit off. So This was the old one. Dialing the eccentricity down to about 3 gives me this kind of result. This was at 0.5 and this is at 0.1, so you can really see the difference that value, which controls kind of the spread of the highlight, will have on my final project. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it at 2. Seems a little sharp, so I'm going to go with 3, which seems like it has a nice even kind of metallic looking spread. So with the 0.3 set up here with the eccentricity, I think this looks pretty good. You can feel free to dial in your lights and play with kind of different results, and see what you can get as far as just do some test renders, see what you can get, make sure it's looking good to you. So this looks pretty good to me. I'm going to render another one out kind of on the back side. So this is sort of the back side render, and I wanted kind of like the dark side of the moon effect, right? So I want to show off that glow. So that's looking pretty good. All right, this is going to be my 3/4 lighting as far as having some shade, some highlight going on. So what I want to do here is, yeah, this is kind of looking pretty good. So I'm thinking this looks pretty good. About time to ship it. So what I want to do now is go back to my view down here. Go to view, go to camera tools or camera settings. I'm going to turn on resolution gate. What this is going to do is frame my animation based upon my resolution and kind of my view ratios. This is my nice 16:9 view box. If we hit play, everything seems to be fitting in here okay. So this is, again, camera settings. We have our I'm sorry, not camera settings, camera tools. Yeah, it's camera settings. We have our resolution gate turned on. We have it masked so that we can see how everything's going to be framed. And as we can see, looking at the turntable, everything fits in here pretty nice. I'm going to try to make it a little bigger. The way I want to do that is by going back to the first frame here, and we can see our camera. And I'm just going to kind of crunch it in just a little bit. Okay, pull it down maybe. And you see this little room here, We want to leave some safe action just in case something gets cropped. But overall, kind of make it a little bigger. So just make sure everything's fitting, nothing's getting cropped out of the top and bottom. The framing looks nice. Just looking from my viewport, it looks like the playback's kind of looking pretty nice. So yeah, I'm thinking we're pretty good here. All right, so last thing I want to do is just pick a couple of frames. Let's kind of start with, say, this one, and actually render it out full res with everything kind of turned on, kind of like we want to ship this. Just gonna have everything turned on and render out a couple of frames, make sure everything's looking good. This is kind of our last check before we send this to a batch render. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just click on the viewport, set to 1080p, hit the render button. Big window. All right, so I've made a few renders, and then I'm just kind of looking at, okay, so the first frame, the next frame, kind of working around the back side. So just kind of looking, checking, making sure everything looks pretty good, and I believe it does. So what I'm going to do now is move on to the last step, which is going to be the batch render. Okay, so all of our settings are set up. We have our frames and our timeline all set up. All of our render settings are set up. So last thing I want to do is start a batch render. Okay, so this is pretty easily done. Just go to rendering, go to render, and go to batch render. In this case, make sure everything should be set up by default here to work pretty well, and then all you want to do is hit the batch render button. And what will come up is your little script editor will start coming up, and you'll see an extra icon pop up, and it'll be rendering all the frames in the background. And then hopefully it'll be done, and you'll have a whole list of frames in a directory that you can then compile into your final animation. Okay, so pretty simple process. My one last thing is make sure you save this before you hit the batch render button, just so that you have all your settings saved in case Maya decides to crash or the renderer crashes on you. Well, that's it. Happy